Hello, hello, Teela. Thank you for joining us today. And for all those joining in the chat, let us know that you can hear us, that you can see us. It would be great if you wrote in where you're from. We're still just getting set up here. Teela's going to kick this off in a few minutes, but thank you for joining us on this fine day. I see we got all sorts of people already chiming in. We got Luxembourg, Florida, Winnipeg, Canada, nice. South Africa, South Carolina, North Carolina, DC. For everybody who's joining us and it's in their nighttime, just thank you. I know that that's not the easiest thing, and we do appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Nice, nice, nice. And then let us know if you could hear us in the chat too. We just want to make sure everything works before we start this workshop. Nice. Looks like people could hear us. That's great. That's great. And if you could also put in the chat before we start this off, anything that you're looking to learn today. Before we kick this off, there will be a replay after. I have a feeling, that's a question we often see. At the end, if you're joining late, if you have to hop off in between, that's a-okay. There will be a replay that goes out after. But if there's any questions you have, there's anything you want Teela to cover at the end, there will be a live Q&A. And even if you have to hop off, you can put your questions in now, and perhaps we'll get to them at the end. You could hear us. Great, Liz. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it. We got SoCal. We got all sorts of places here. Let me just give one technical note before we fully kick this off. I'm going to share my screen for just a second. Give me one moment here. This should work. For all those who are joining right now, if anything looks a little blurry, if anything looks a little fuzzy, what you should see is this, the YouTube video, the live right here. You can actually click on settings. If anything's looking a little fuzzy, just make sure you set your quality to 720. I have mine set to auto, but 720 is really where you're going to want to be. Let me stop my screen share. Great. Folks can hear us. Things are looking good. Awesome. Well, with that, everybody who's joining today, the wonderful, wonderful Teela Cunningham is going to be giving her tutorial on Procreate and creating beautiful watercolor digital illustrations with that. Without further ado, Teela, I'd love to kick it over to you, have you introduce yourself and what folks can look forward to in this workshop today.
All right, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to share my process for creating some watercolor floral doodles entirely in Procreate. So we're going to start off by creating some individual elements, which is really good practice getting familiar with the brushes that we're going to be using. You can use default Procreate brushes, but they're just not fine-tuned enough for this type of artwork. So I would recommend a paid set. I'm using my paid set of Procreate illustration brushes, but if you have another paid set that you would love to use, they're just a little bit more fine-tuned for the aesthetic of watercolor rather than just the default ones that come with Procreate. So that would be my biggest recommendation for this type of aesthetic. So I'm going to walk you through how my brushes behave, how to achieve certain looks. We're going to create those individual elements, and then we're actually going to put them all together for a composition. So we're going to end up with a really pretty fall bouquet. So this is all really beginner friendly. So if you've never even opened Procreate before, you'll be able to follow along. And I'm giving you the free color palette too. So if you are following the replay later, you can download the color palette and you'll have everything that you need to follow along. So I will switch my screen over if that sounds good, and we'll get started. All right, hopefully everyone can see the outcome. So this is what we're going to create in this session. So you can see we've got some roses in here, we've got some violets, some wheat, and then we've got some leafy elements to kind of fill everything out and finish it off. So those are the individual elements that we're going to draw first. I've got my Procreate watercolor illustration brush set right here. You can see it's a pretty lengthy brush set, but it's got everything you need to create these effects. We're only going to be using a couple brushes out of here for this outcome, since this is a more beginner-friendly tutorial. So we're going to be using this round liner brush up at the very top for all of our lines. And then for the majority of our floral elements, we're going to be using this medium paint round brush, which has the watercolor texture built into it. So whenever you draw with it, you're going to instantly get that texture, which is really cool. So I want to give you the color palette first. So this is a link to the color palette. Hopefully you can see that. It's every-tuesday.com/teachable-floral. So if you put that in to your browser, I recommend using Chrome. It should show up at the very bottom of your screen, and then you can download and install it directly into Procreate, and it will show up automatically in your palettes. So that is the link to the color palette. Just an FYI, I am on, let me give you my specs too. I am on a 3rd gen iPad Pro. It's a 12.9 inch, 256 gig, and I'm on a 2nd gen, I'm using a 2nd gen Apple Pencil. For these types of effects, because we're utilizing the pressure sensitivity of an iPad, I recommend having an iPad that allows for pressure sensitivity. So if you go to every-tuesday.com/iPad, you can see a whole list of different iPads that Apple recommends if you want pressure sensitivity. It's basically any iPad that is compatible with either 1st gen or 2nd gen Apple Pencil. So all that technical stuff out of the way, we are going to be creating our individual elements first, which are these right here. So I'm going to create a brand new document that is screen sized, but you can create any document size that you would like. That's just a little easier to work with all the elements that we're creating. So you can just go to your gallery and then hit the plus and then screen size right up at the top. And we are all good to go. All right. So we're going to start with some simpler elements first, and then we'll move on to the more complex ones. So my color palette's already loaded in right here. We're going to start by drawing our violets, or just really simple, basic, general flowers. These are really good as filler elements whenever you're creating a bouquet, wherever you have a little bit of white space, or you feel like you need just something a little bit extra to fill in the gaps. This floral element is the perfect solution for that. And it's really, really easy to draw, which is even better. So I'm going to grab my purple, which is right in the middle of that palette, and I'm going to grab my medium paint round brush, and the size of this is 9%. So I'm going to zoom in here, and all you want to do with your stylus is just press, and you'll get a dot, and then press, 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 and press, and you can see we've got that texture, and that variation of the texture is built into this brush. So you don't have to do anything extra. You're just pressing and you're making these little dots with the pressure of your stylus. And then to add a center, I'm just going to grab my yellow right next to it and just fill it in here. If you want it to be darker, you just fill it in right on top of it, and that will darken it up. The way that this brush behaves, it's kind of like, sorry about that. It's kind of like a wet on dry technique. So if you painted with traditional watercolors before, if you paint it and you let it dry and then you paint over it, you're getting an increased density in those areas where you're painting on top of. So in the same way, if I draw with my purple, if I keep my stylus down and I lift up and then I draw on it again, you're going to see that overlap, which can be really pretty for some effects, but you may not always want that to happen. So just keep in mind with these brushes, you're going to want to keep your stylus down the entire time for your stroke, unless you want these overlaps to appear. So we're going to draw just a couple more of these. Once again, I'm just making dots, and I've got 5. These are just petals. Really simple. Go in with your yellow for your centers. If you want to darken them up, you just draw on top of it again. I can zoom out here. I am going to create a brand new layer, and I'm going to change my brush to the round liner brush because it's our liner brush. We need some lines for the stems, and then I can just grab this color right here at the bottom left and then just draw these lines down. That's kind of thick. Let's go down to like 10%. And there we go. Just like that, we've got our first set of flowers for our bouquet. You guys still with me? We still good? I think you guys are still muted. I'm going to assume that we're still together on this. All right.
Yeah, Teela, just a question from the chat. I mean, I see some folks asking where exactly to open the color palette. if they had some questions around the brushes. I don't know if you see that in the chat as well.
Oh, no, I don't have the chat open.
Yep. Where in particular did they open the color palette, and what brush do they recommend if you don't actually have the watercolor brushes you're using? Those are two questions I see here. Maybe you could help with.
Okay, since these are using my brushes specifically, it's tough to make a recommendation, especially for the default ones, just because they're not as reliable. If you come down here to where it says water, there's a few of them in here that you can play around with. The water or bleed one might be your best bet, because these ones are more scatter and softer. So I would go with the water bleed if you're just testing the techniques out. And then we're talking about the color palette, which is right over here. Once you download that color palette, if you come over here and hit palettes, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom of your palettes, and you'll see it at the very bottom. And then you can just hit default, and that will be your default. And then I hit disk, and then it'll show up right here. Does that help? Hopefully.
Let us know in the chat if that was a bit helpful. Again, thank you for covering that, Teela.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, we will just move right along then. The next one that we're going to create is kind of a leafy element, but it's a wheat element. And this is really good just because we're working with fall elements here. So I am going to grab my round liner brush again. We'll create a brand new layer. I like working in multiple layers, because if I change my mind on anything later, it's really easy for me to go back and change things. If I create everything on one layer and I have overlaps with things, if I want to change something later on, I have to recreate it. I can't just edit those individual elements. So it's a really good habit to get into with not only layering your artwork, but labeling your layers. For the sake of time, we're just going to move right along. But normally I would be labeling every single layer that I create as well. So it's really easy to reference what I've done on each layer later on. Okay, so I've got my brown selected right here. It's the third one in the second row, and my round liner brush, and I'm just going to draw 2 lines down. And then we're going to return back to our medium paint round brush and put a dot on the top. And then you're going to angle your next dots. So they're more like ovals. And I usually put them kind of close together, just like that, like real wheat. So this is a very simplified version. And then that's how easy it is to have a little wheat element. So that changes up things for your composition. And now we've got those elements. So now we know how to make them and include them in our composition. The next one is going to be our branch. And our branch, we're going to grab our kind of darker sage green right here at the bottom on the left. And I'm going to come back to my round liner brush, and I'm just going to draw a branch. So lines coming off of other lines. Make it however you'd like. This is your composition. There's no pressure at all to be perfect here. So however you want to draw your petals, if you don't want to do dots, if you want to do different shapes, feel free to do whatever you want. There's so much freedom here to make this your own. So once I have my branch, I'm going to come back to my medium paint round brush, and I'm just going to put dots. Just keep things nice and simple up at the tops of each of these. And then to fill it out, I'm just going to add in some additional dots here and there. And you can make this as dense as you'd like as far as leaves go. I'm going to make mine just a little scattered. It is a fall layout, so maybe fewer leaves on that one. Okay, so those are our main elements outside of our roses and then our leaves. So I'm going to walk you through how I create leaves next. So I'm going to grab the middle color right here, that green. And for leaves, there's a couple ways that you can do. You can do the traditionally drawn pointed oval, and then just fill it in. Make sure you're keeping your stylus on the screen the whole time, because if you draw just the outline and then you pick up your stylus and then you paint over it, you're going to get those overlaps, and you may not always want that. So just remember to keep your stylus down for the entire leaf. Another way is the way that these brushes are programmed with pressure sensitivity. You can actually start with little pressure, lots of pressure, little pressure, and draw a leaf that way, which can be a little quicker depending on the style that you're going for or the element that you want to create or attach these to. So
And Teela,
yes,
that is absolutely lovely. I'm seeing here in the chat, especially for these sections, could you mind just slowing it down just a little bit? Because I think folks are really enjoying watching this particular one and the different variations. Would you mind going through those again and just a little slower for the group?
Of course, of course.
Thank you so much.
For your leaf element, it's a pointed oval. So you're going to come at the point, draw it up, and then draw it around and then fill it in. Just like that. And just make sure you're keeping your stylus on the screen the whole time, because whenever you pick up your stylus and then put it back down and you paint over whatever element you have, that's where you get that overlap. And traditionally, this would be considered your wet on dry technique, where you paint something, you let the paint dry, and then you paint wet paint on top of the dry paint. So that's wet on dry, that's where that comes from. And for this brush, so this takes a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's really, really fun. And all you want to do is little pressure. If you have an iPad with pressure sensitivity, it's little pressure, lots of pressure, little pressure. So you can just play around with that and have a lot of fun. So like that, so you can make different leaf shapes. Sometimes with daisies, I'll come up, make it big, and then come back down. So you can do all kinds of different leaf shapes with these. So it's something that's really cool to play around with. Some other leaf shapes, you do like pointed circles. So you just got to point at the end. You can even draw lines to them if you want to add some extra detail, because we do have that wet on dry technique. So that's a way to use it to your advantage. If you want to add in some little veins to your leaves, you could do that too. So there's a lot of ways to customize this and make it your own. It's really fun once you've got a good set of brushes to really go crazy, especially if you have these, especially if you have pressure sensitivity. It can be really fun. You can even add in some shading along the side if you want to just draw another stroke along it, so you can get some dimension with your leaves that way as well. So yeah, leaves are really fun. I could just sit and draw leaves for forever. So those are some of my tips for drawing leaves. And now we can move on to our roses. So our roses are the most complex, but I have a pretty simple method for drawing them, so I want to share that with you. These ones will take some practice because they utilize the pressure sensitivity. So once you get the hang, once you build up that muscle memory of where you do little pressure and lots of pressure on the screen, it'll get easier and easier. So if you get frustrated, stick with it, just keep practicing and you'll get the hang of it. It can sometimes be helpful to just draw out the roses with one pressure just to get your shapes down, and then go back in and play around with your pressure. So I'll show you the general shape that I usually do for these. I'm going to create a brand new layer. I'm going to grab my red right in the middle at the top. And let's zoom in here. I'm once again using my medium paint round brush. So the shape of these, you're just going to start out by drawing like a C, and then you draw another one the opposite way, so they kind of interlock. So this is the center of the rose where all the petals are super, super tight together. So we're just kind of showing that in a very simplistic way. And then you're going to come around, lots of pressure, little pressure. So in this area, we don't want another gap. So wherever there's a gap here, I'm covering it with a petal. So right here, I've got a gap. So I know that I don't want to add another gap. Like I don't want to draw a petal right here, because then I'm going to create, your eye is going to naturally go to that white space. So we're going to prevent that from happening. So because this is a gap right here, I'm going to come around and draw my next petal right there. So now I've got gaps here, so I know to come around. And then my petals will automatically get larger as you go around the rose because it's opening up. So that's something else to keep in mind, that your petals are going to get longer and larger. So now I can come around here. And you can see I'm covering this gap each time. And it's okay to like overlap a gap right here. You don't have to just meet here all the time. You can have something like this. And once again, I'm putting pressure every time I come around. So I start with a little pressure, lots of pressure, and that's where it gets fat and big, and then little pressure. So that's how it finishes off. And you can come around this as many times as you'd like. And then from far away, you've already got a rose. So I'll do this one more time so you can see it again. I'm going to change up my color. I'm going to create a brand new layer. Once again, you're going to draw that C shape. So it's tiny right here, an interlocking one, and then start coming around. And then you've got some roses. So if you want to add in, you can keep drawing petals and petals and petals. So you can make these as big as you'd like. To finish it off, roses, just to let your eye interpret it as a rose as well. It's usually helpful to have a few leaves around it. So I'm going to grab this last green color right here. I'm keeping my same brush and I'm going to do that pointed oval leaf. And I can overlap them too and get some pretty effects where they meet right there. You can do the same thing down here. Okay, so those are our roses. So now we've got all the elements. These are the only elements that we're using for our entire piece. So just practice these, get the hang of these first, and then you can move on to the composition afterwards. So is everybody ready to move on to the composition? Are we good?
Well, one question just to repeat from the chat, Teela. I know we covered at the beginning is the what kind of stylus? I see Amy asked that. Like,
yes.
what do you recommend is your preferred stylus when making these?
Right, so Procreate is an iPad only app, and because it's an Apple app, I recommend using an Apple Pencil. It just ensures that everything's going to work seamlessly for you. You can use a third-party stylus. I've never used a third-party stylus just because I wanted the reliability of having Apple everything, because then I just know that everything's going to work the way I need it to work. So that's my recommendation. So yeah, you can use third-party styluses, but I'm not the right person to ask because I've stuck with Apple Pencil the whole time.
And one more question I think maybe is worth covering, Teela, right now is Martha asked, in traditional watercolor, we use lifting to remove pigment for highlights. And I do see some suggestions on using the eraser to get the same effect. Do you have any feedback or suggestions on how best to do that?
I do. I actually, this past Tuesday, because I release a new Procreate tutorial every single Tuesday, this past Tuesday, I did a full tutorial on creating a shiny vase. So that would be something very similar to what you would do with traditional watercolor. And I actually use layer masking for that, which is a more advanced technique in Procreate. So I would recommend my YouTube channel. Just go youtube.com/everytues. And it's like every Tuesday without the day on it. And you'll see my most recent tutorial. It walks you through that entire process using layer masking and integrating smudging that mask. So you can get some really cool effects that way. And you have so much more freedom than the eraser. Using an eraser is destructive editing, so you're removing artwork, whereas layer masking is simply hiding your artwork. So it's a smarter way to work because you can always bring back anything that you accidentally hide rather than erasing it completely, where you have to rebuild it later if you change your mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Teela.
Yeah, no problem. All right, we're going to get started on our composition. So I'm going to group everything that we've done together and then just turn it off. So in order to group your layers, you're just going to slide them to the right. So you'll see they all turn blue, and then hit group up here, and that puts them in a group. You can toggle them up by just hitting that little caret right there, and then you can turn off their visibility by just unchecking. So they're still there, they're just turned off. Now I'm going to create a brand new layer, and this is going to be our sketch layer. So I'm going to select black for this. So double tap where the black is, and that will give you true black. And then come to your brushes, and I'm going to use the sketching pencil for this. The sketching pencil just has more of a graphite texture to it, whereas the round liner brush has a watercolor texture to it. So that's why I use the sketching pencil instead of the round liner. All right, so whenever you're creating a composition, it can really help to look at reference images. In my course, I teach a whole process and method for doing that, but for the sake of time, we're going to simplify it by focusing on the size of our different elements. So with our roses are our largest element, so we want all the focus to go there and then to spread outward. So whenever someone looks at our bouquet, they're going to notice the roses first, and then they're going to notice everything else around it. So I like sketching just really rough placement of my different elements. So I start with my largest elements, and then I move to my smallest elements. So for the roses, I'm going to have 3 big roses. So I'm going to have one right here, and right here. And you can choose these placements based on a reference image or a photograph and use it that way, or you can just freehand it like this. So the next elements are going to be my little flowers that we drew first. So I'm going to put a little bunch of them right here just to kind of notate, and I can get an idea of how the final look is going to be, this final composition. I'm going to put another little bunch down here. There are parts when I'm making a composition that I like being symmetrical just to balance everything. And then I'll also introduce other elements that only appear on one side. So for these ones, I'm actually going to put them in all the gaps right here for consistency, but I'm going to include different elements not as symmetrical for the rest of it. And that's a really good way to have visual balance without it being like matchy-matchy everywhere. So we've got our florals in there, and now we can move on to, I like adding in some leaves since we've got our roses right here. So I'm going to add in a few leaves where I think they should go. So this is all freehanding. So it's your composition. There's no rhyme or reason here. Just add them wherever you would like to see some leaves. So much freedom in this type of style. So you can see I have one in some places, I have two in others. So this is where it starts getting changed up a little bit. So now I can add in my little wheat elements. So I can say like, there'll be one right here. I'm just going to notate it by scribbling the tops of them. I'll add another one right here. Maybe we'll have one right here. And then on this side, we'll add a couple. And it's okay for things to look a little busy right now. We'll definitely make sure that things are cleaned up later. And I'll lower that one. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. This is your sketch layer, so you can do whatever you want to it. It's not part of the final artwork, so you're allowed to use the eraser here. I also try to focus on some pieces being really outside of the main composition and some that are a little tighter to it, just to give us some variety, because if everything is at the same level all the way around, it becomes less interesting. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is just having things extend further out and some things that are a little closer together. Okay, so now we can add in our branches, which is kind of our final element with this. So I'm going to add in a branch like here. We'll add one up behind these flowers maybe, another one here. Once again, just wherever it feels right to you. There's no like formula for this. All right, and then you can, this sketch is a foundation for everything. As you start adding things in and painting them in, you can totally change your mind. You can edit, you can change, you can adjust. This is just to give us a starting point. That way we're not starting and having no clue where to go next. So now we can kind of look at it and see how we feel about it. If there's anything you want to change or adjust or rotate, now's the time to do it. I think I would probably just add some more leaves later on, but that would be a little too busy for my sketch layer. So it's just something I'm keeping in the back of my mind once I start working. That's something I can add in. But this feels pretty good. So I'm going to reduce the opacity of it now so it's not competing with our painting. So in order to do that, just come to your layer, hit the little N, drag your opacity down. So I like it really light, but that I can still see it. I want to make sure you guys can still see it on screen. How's that look? Can you guys still see it?
I see it beautifully, Teela.
Okay, great. So this is 28%. So it's really light, but I'm going to be able to see all of my paint on top of it really well. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, and we're going to start with our roses first and then work outward. So I am going to I'm going to do a rose in each one of these top colors. So you can just choose whatever order you'd like. I'm just going to work in a row. So I'm going to grab the first one. I'm going to come to my medium paint round brush for these, and we'll just draw that in. So this is my general shape. I think I drew my circles just a little large here, so I'm making a mental note that I'm going to draw my roses just a little bit smaller so they're not overpowering all my accents. So draw that C, another hook in, and then start painting around it. Is there anything I can answer while I'm painting these in? Oops.
There was a question about, I know you said it in the beginning, but which iPad are you using? Just because
This,
folks are wondering, you know, what, I know there's so
sure.
many different Apple products at this point, but you know, which one are you using in this video?
So this is a 3rd gen iPad Pro. It's a 12.9-inch, 256 gig. I use an iPad Pro because it's really powerful. So whenever I draw a line, the response is immediate. I see that line drawn immediately. But if you wanted to go for one of the more affordable options out there, I don't like how I do that. You can definitely choose one of the other ones that offers pressure sensitivity. But just keep in mind that there may be just a little bit of a lag. That's the main difference between spending all that money for an iPad Pro and one of the other ones. It's storage space, screen size, and then the lag time. So if you're doing a lot of drawing, if you plan on doing a lot of digital drawing or lettering in Procreate, then I would probably recommend the iPad Pro if the budget allows. But if this is more of a hobby, then absolutely don't feel obligated to spend all of that, because that's really the main thing to be aware of.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, that rose looks pretty good. I'm going to move it into position just by hitting my little selector up here, and now I have a bounding box around it and I can just slide it into place. So this is just a little bit smaller than the circle I drew, and because it's on its own layer, it's not grouped with the sketch layer, I can move it, adjust it, rotate it, whatever I want. So once we get into this, I can even reduce the size of my sketch layer if I wanted to kind of follow with what I've already drawn. Let me zoom out so I can see my whole bounding box. And if I have uniform selected, it'll just scale it uniformly so I can make it fit in with what I've drawn a little better. So there's definitely room to make adjustments as you move along. Okay, so on to our next rows. Create a brand new layer.
And Teela,
yeah.
if you don't mind, for those joining late, can you
Sure.
remind what brush you just used for creating that rose?
Yes, I am using, out of my watercolor illustration brush set, the medium paint round brush. And the size of it is like 9–10%.
Great.
Okay, on a new layer for our second rose, we're just going to replicate the exact same process. And it's good to spend your time on these roses because this is the main focal point. Like, I saw a couple petals that I didn't like, just 2-tap to undo, redraw them, because when you look at this composition, that's what you're going to be seeing right away. So if you're going to spend extra time on anything, I'd recommend it be on these roses. And once again, I'm starting with little pressure, going to lots of pressure, and back to little pressure, making my strokes larger as I go around my rose. Okay, and it's perfectly fine to have overlaps here too. It can actually look really pretty just because the way a rose naturally opens up, you're gonna start seeing those petals get kind of tight. Okay, we've got 2 roses on to the third and the last one. So I'm grabbing that color, the last one there. Again, just be aware of where your gaps are. You don't want to create an additional gap because then your eye is going to be drawn to that area. You can also rotate your canvas if it makes it a little easier. Sometimes I draw really good strokes if I'm like moving in this direction, but I can't make the same thing happen the other way. And luckily you just rotate your canvas and you can do the same thing. Okay, we've got 3 roses and we can preview our artwork as we move along just by turning your sketch layer on and off. So just turn this little check mark on and off and that will affect the visibility. So that's looking good. We are ready to move on. So I'm going to move to my little flowers next. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, grab my purple, and then where these little flowers are that I sketched, I don't think I'm going to put in quite as many because I think I'm going to make them a little larger than that. but I know the general area and the placement, and that's what that sketch layer is there for. And I like changing up the size of these too. So maybe I've got a little one over here, and I can make a really big one over here. Variation is really important with these types of compositions. Okay, now we can paint in the centers of them, create a brand new layer. I'm gonna grab my yellow color right next to the purple and then just draw that dot in. So really, really simple. Okay, so those look good. We're going to repeat the same thing on the other sides. So I'm going to put all of my purple on one layer and all of my centers on one layer. Since they're not touching each other, it's okay to keep them organized this way. So I'm coming back to my purple layer and grabbing my purple and then painting those in again. Okay, and I can do these ones at the same time. All right, and then we'll just drop those centers in and these flowers will be done.
And Teela, one question I see for folks who are joining late is, can you also show again, you know, the going back through to get flowers darker, the using multiple strokes? I know you showed that earlier in the presentation.
Yep, if you want to overlap them, let me just create a layer up at the top so you can see this. So you can have a petal that's like this, and you want to draw it in one stroke with your stylus on the screen. As soon as you lift up and put another stroke on, it's like doubling the color up, just like in traditional watercolor. So now if I paint over the same petal, you're going to see that overlap, that wet on dry technique happening right where they overlap. So that's the really cool thing about these watercolor brushes. But if that's a look that you don't want, just make sure you're keeping your stylus on the screen for the entire stroke that you're making with your stylus. So you can make some really pretty flowers that way if that's what you'd like as part of your composition. But for these ones, these are really basic. So that's why I'm just kind of doing dots around, but there is a little bit of overlap here and there. So I just leave that in because it's just part of the beauty of watercolor. I'm going to delete that extra layer. Okay. Now we can add in the stems to these flowers. So I'm going to create a brand new layer. I'm going to drag it underneath that purple layer, just so it naturally appears behind your flowers. Layer order is really important in Procreate. Whatever's on the top will appear in the front of your whole canvas, your artwork. So if you have a layer that's way down here, it's going to appear beneath anything that's above it up here. So just something to keep in mind. It gives you a lot of power when you're creating different pieces of artwork. So this is going to be my stem layer. I can just rename this one stem. They changed this and now it's like so different. All right, it's going to be stem 14. I'm going to grab this first color right there. I'm going to grab my round liner brush and just draw these down. I'm going to reduce the size of this to 6%. Still getting used to the changes with Procreate 5X, which just got released like 2 days ago. And the new iOS too. There's so many more features that I'm having a lot of fun with right now. I do kind of miss my keyboard when I'm renaming layers though. I'm sure I'm gonna like this one more as time goes on. Okay, and then where I hit the edge of a petal, I just naturally pick it up where I think it's gonna happen because I don't want that color going through the petals themselves. All right, I think I got everything. Let's preview this by turning off our sketch layer. It's looking pretty good. All right, turn that back on. Come up to the top, create a brand new layer. I'm gonna draw in some leaves around my roses just to start filling things out, and that will really help me to see where the rest of my elements, the wheat and the branches, are gonna go to help me finish everything off. So it starts filling everything out from the center and then I'm working outward. So I'm going to grab this color right here. I still am going to use my medium paint round brush for basically all of the elements here. Just for the line elements is what I'm using my round liner brush for. So I'm going to add in some of these leaves, and then where they hit my rose, you can see I'm making kind of a funky shape because your eye is going to naturally interpret that as going behind the rose. So even though there's white right there, totally fine. Your eye is going to make up for it whenever it's looking at it. So this is kind of how I fill things in, and it looks like things are overlapping without having the really ugly color overlaps. All right, where all of these roses are meeting, I'm going to fill this in with this color too, as if there's just a bunch of leaves back here. Because it would look kind of weird to have just this giant white space right in the center. All right, a couple more leaves. And you can draw any style of leaves that you would like. This pointed oval leaf is really good for beginners and, you know, people that have been using Procreate for a long time. I love them. I use them all the time. All right, that's looking pretty good so far. I'm going to start adding in some other elements, and we can always come back and add more of these later on. This is just to get me started and establish that foundation. So the next thing I'm going to do is add in the little wheat elements, where we'll add in the branches, and then just finish it off with any supporting leaves wherever we might have some final gaps that we need to fill. So almost done. So we're going to come back to our brown for our wheat like we practiced earlier. Grab your round liner brush, and I'm going to draw, oops, wrong element. We're going to draw the wheat right here. I'm going to leave that wheat off since it's running into that leaf, but I can draw it up a little taller. So just make adjustments as you're going with how things are looking. Sometimes I draw the stem of these extra elements all the way down, and other times I'll leave them off because I don't want things to get too crowded. When you have a lot of elements here, even though it would make sense that you'd always draw every element all the way down, it can just get so visually busy that it gets a little overwhelming, and then it just becomes less beautiful. So something else to keep in mind, like I'm not going to draw that one all the way down because I've already got other stems that are over there. Okay, I think that's all the wheat now. So I'm going to return back to my medium paint round brush and then draw a dot at the top and then these angled dots. And I usually do like 3 or 4 on these, on the sides. Let's see, just a couple left. I'm gonna make this one come all the way, the rest of the way up here. Kind of liked how high the original one was. And then this one is our added in one. Remember to keep some of these taller than others. All right. Let's preview this, turn off your sketch layer. I like being really tight and zoomed in. Like I can see some of these. This one's kind of hanging pretty low, so I already know my branch is going to have to come in and fill in this part. That way this doesn't seem odd right here, because right now it seems really out of place. My eye naturally goes to it because it's so far away from the center, whereas everything else is a little tighter. So I'm just keeping that in mind. So this is what I'm looking for when I'm previewing it. So I see it super close up, and then I'll also zoom out, turn this around. I'll zoom out and see how it looks from far away. And sometimes it helps to blur your eyes a little bit, and you can see if there's any stray elements that seem out of place that way. So that's one of those handy tips that I learned at art school, that you zoom out and blur your eyes. So, all right, so we're ready to move forward with our branches, and then we'll add in any final pieces. So I'm going to create a brand new layer, and this will be our branches. So I'm going to come back to this first color right here. I'm going to grab my round liner brush and draw in these branches. And you can make these branches as simple or complex as you'd like. if you want this to be really filled out, just make sure you add in just a ton of leaves on them. Because this is a fall composition, it makes more sense to me that some of these branches have lost their leaves. So that's why I'm drawing a little bit less than I normally would. So I'm going to change this up a little bit just because this area was feeling a little empty. So instead of drawing my branch following the sketch layer, I'm moving it over just a little bit to fill in this area that seems like it could use just a little something extra. And let's see, this was also the area that was a little problematic. So I'm going to add an additional branch here. That way there's less attention to the wheat and it just feels full in that area. I can even add in an additional branch right here. So the branches and the leaves are definitely my go-to with fall compositions to fill things out. All right, let's see how that looks. Before, it seems like I need a little something right here. Before I start putting all the leaves on, I'm just going to see if I need anything more. Like, does anything feel weird? And this part feels like it needs something. Everything else feels pretty consistent all the way around, but right here, my eye's going directly to it. So that's how I know I've got to add something here. And I could come back, I could add a couple flowers, I could add some wheat elements, but for the sake of time, we're just gonna add a branch for now. But if I were to come back through, I would probably add some flowers right there. Okay, so now I'm just going to switch over to my medium paint brown brush and just start adding in some dots to the tops of the branches, and then I will just sporadically and randomly throw some in on the branches. And I don't even need to turn on my sketch layer anymore because this is all about finishing touches, whatever you want to add in or change to complete yours. And I make my little leaves go all different directions too. But once again, you can change the leaf shape if you want to take a little more time than I'm taking by just smacking the canvas with leaves. We're getting there. You can see what a difference that makes, or we have just plain branches and then branches with leaves. Another thing you could add in is just regular branches that have lost all their leaves. That would be a really good addition for a piece like this, fall themed. That would be really good for a winter bouquet too, just empty branches. All right, I think I got all my branches. Let's turn this back around. Sorry if I'm making you guys dizzy. Okay, so the very last thing that I want to do, because this is fall, we're still going to introduce a little bit of summer into it because this is a little more, I don't want to say drab because that's such a bad word, but it's very, like it all feels very fall-like, and this is kind of changing from summer to fall in my mind. So I'm going to create a brand new layer and just add in a pop of green just to add a little bit more contrast since everything is kind of sitting within the same, I don't know, value. So I am just looking for any other gaps that I can fill with just a pop of green. And this is really simple. You're just adding in these pointed oval leaves just to finish everything off. I'm really careful not to overlap existing elements too much. These final details, it will happen, but it's something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind as I'm doing it. Like, don't overlap too many flowers because you want the flowers to, you know, appear and look really good. These branches, I'm less worried about when I overlap them. They're just branches, they're supporting. All right, let's see how that looks. It's pretty good. I actually think I like, with something like this, I'll turn it around a few times because how I originally started it, like I originally started thinking that this would be the upright position, but now I'm thinking that that might look better. And with Procreate, it's really easy to do that. So I think I kind of like it like this at an angle. All right, so just take another look at it, see if you want to add, adjust, change anything, and then you're done. I'm actually going to move my leaf layer all the way to the bottom, so it's behind everything. So just tap until it's white or until it's blue, and then drag all the way to the bottom, and that will put it behind these elements. So where I was overlapping before, you can see those stems are going through it, and that can be really pretty. So there we go. That is a beginner-friendly floral composition in Procreate.
Teela, that was awesome.
Oh, I'm so glad you liked it.
Yeah, that was incredible. And I mean, this is something I want this on my house, right? This is something I wish it was real. I want to put it somewhere. While we give folks a few minutes here to put in some questions, right?
Sure.
We have time for some Q&A.
Yep.
It would be great, you have your course. I would love if you could tell the audience a bit about your course, what they could learn, while they put together some different questions. So could you share a bit about your course on Teachable?
Sure. So I recently created an entire course on watercolor florals and Procreate. So this is kind of an introduction to that, believe it or not. So these are flat florals. We actually introduce wet on wet, wet on dry techniques. So traditional watercolor painting methods, we create them in a digital manner, and we have 10 different projects. So we're going to do vases, we're going to do more bouquets, we've got wreath designs. We actually do photorealism. So we replicate an existing photo entirely in Procreate with watercolor. So there's a lot of fun different projects that utilize a lot of methods, and it builds in complexity. So it's extremely beginner friendly. You just want to make sure you go through the class from the first project to the last project, and you will advance your skills in Procreate so much, because every project is built on the last project. So we use skills that you learned at the beginning all the way to the end, and we slowly build. So by the time you get to the end, the last project of the class, you're going to have an entire toolbox of skills that you can use for any floral project or any illustration project really in the future that you'd like to use these watercolor effects with. So it's a really fun course. You get a lot of texture, a lot of really beautiful artwork out of it, and skills that you can use for anything you want to make in the future.
That's incredible. And Teela, while we get ready for the Q&A, if you want, feel free to kill your screen share. That way
Sure.
the audience can see you. I see a couple different questions here. If you want to start with, I think, let me grab Sahar's question. What Sahar asked, how do you plan out what you're going to draw? Like, where do you get some of your inspirations from? Can you maybe share a bit about that?
Sure. So I'll look at different online websites. I have a board on my Pinterest that's just flower reference photos. So I'll look at real photographs of bouquets, floral bouquets, and I will bring them into Procreate. I will pull different colors. I will practice different shapes of different flowers, and then I will just start placing them together, organizing them. I will look at and evaluate different bouquets to get an idea of what are my largest florals, what are my smallest supporting florals, what type of leaf shapes are being used for this particular bouquet. So I'm kind of looking at bouquets as a whole, dissecting them, practicing them myself, and then just creating my own bouquets after I practice a few from memory. And that really helps me to make it my own artwork, which I think is really important. So it's less about looking at other people's artwork. I'm looking at real photographs of real flowers. And that helps me to always make original artwork out of that.
And with that, you mentioned the new Procreate's out. Do you have any new tutorials coming? Any plans to give any demonstrations or videos on how to explore all the new features that are in the new Procreate?
Yeah, so my tutorials are usually all project-based, so you're going to learn how to create an outcome rather than just having a video that's like, here's all the new features and how to use them. Like, I like creating a project and we use them by creating something really cool. So my next tutorials will definitely start utilizing some of those tools. I've been nonstop on the couch with Procreate, figuring out how I can use them, what's changed, what I can share with others that I think will be really useful moving forward. So yes, every single week we'll be using the new Procreate version. So you'll see those new tools being used.
And for those asking, there should be a button above the course that will have out the link to the button above the workshop with Teela's course. If you're not seeing that in the replay, I think there's also a link to that. But again, there should be a button above the video you see us talking in, and that'll take you directly to Teela's course. Let me grab another question here. And I see so many. I apologize.
Oh, can I just mention really quick about the course?
Please do.
So if you decide to check the course out, the brush set that we used for this, it's included in the course. I sell it separately, but you'll get the extended license of the brushes. So if you decide to make anything in the future with the brushes that you want to sell, you automatically have that license. It's a $30 license, and it's included within the class purchase. So you don't have to worry about picking up the brushes or anything. You get them right along with the course.
Well, I think we have time for a few more. One question I saw from Susan is regarding your actual course. If they don't want to just recreate your courses, but learn the underlying principles and build their own beautiful projects, is your course a great starting point?
Absolutely. As we go through each project, I'm talking you through exactly what I'm doing, kind of similar to this, with giving you some additional ideas of what you can do, how you can change, how you can adjust it. I share different petal shapes, different leaf shapes. So you have a whole arsenal of different styles that you can experiment with. So even if you follow one of the projects and you want to change up a petal shape or a flower color, that's automatically making it your own. So you'll get a lot of good ideas. We create a bunch of different flower types and leaf types, foliage. So you'll have a lot of tools at your disposal to integrate into any type of artwork that you want to make your own.
Great. And just for anyone who joined really late, as a reminder, we will send this replay out. So if there's any, if you felt that there was something you wanted to rewatch, you want to zoom back, the video link will go out after and you'll have a chance to do that. One thing I saw asked a few different times towards the end is there's multiple generations of the Apple Pencil. Can you repeat which one you use again?
Sure, I'm using the most recent version. It's the 2nd gen Apple Pencil, but if you're using a 1st gen Apple Pencil, you'll still be able to, it still works with these brushes. You'll still be able to follow along exactly. This is the one that's compatible with my iPad, so that's why I'm using that one.
Cool. Let me see here, because I still see more questions rolling in. Again, any of the specific course-related things, any of the going back to Zoom scenes, the replay will go out. I still see folks asking about that, so don't worry, we got you. Again, regarding your course, folks asked, how much does the course cost? Or do you have any discounts or promos that you're running by chance? Would you like to share those?
Sure. So the course is regularly $197, but because you tuned in today, we are offering a limited time offer that is $20 off the course. So that's in addition to all the freebies that are included in the course, you're getting an extra discount of $20 off the course as well, just for tuning in and being a part of this.
Awesome. So one question I had while watching you go through the different brushes is, and this might take even longer to think through, is like in creating those brushes, if folks wanted to create their own brushes, is that anything you cover, right? Like, because I saw some questions around that. Like, there's obviously the stock Procreate brushes and you've made yours. If folks wanted to create their own, is that something they can learn, or do you have any guidance or tips on that?
I have been playing around with an idea about a course on creating brushes because it is a very, very complex and involved process. I personally actually also use Photoshop when I'm creating my brushes. I base all of my brushes off of real art material. So I actually painted out real watercolor. So these are based on real watercolor. So I used to paint with watercolor myself traditionally. So I was really familiar with the different techniques and how I wanted these brushes to behave. So there's so many more options than there ever used to be with Procreate. Procreate 5 really changed their brush engine. So we have so many more capabilities than we used to when it comes to customizing brushes. So these brushes were all fine-tuned with all of those amazing customization options. It's a really complex process though. So it's not a question that's easy to answer in like a sentence. It would require a course, a full course just on that to teach how to do it. I mean, there are the basics about it, but if you want them to behave the way real material or substrates or watercolor, acrylic, all of that. Like you need to look at how real artwork behaves, and then you can interpret it into Procreate.
I did see some questions if the chat will be available after. I'm sorry, unfortunately, it will not. The chat portion, but everything in the video will be. That's what's going to go out via the link. Let me see. I know we're running out of time. I just want to again say thank you, Teela. That was incredible. I learned a ton. I know all the folks in the chat who chimed in. I see so many people who have said thank you and sent it your way. So again, Teela, we appreciate you. We look forward to learning more in your course, and thank you for taking the time to teach us about creating watercolors in Procreate today.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
Our pleasure. Hang on.